Welcome back to our channel. In 1981, the United States Mint was moving steadily through the final years of a coinage era defined by consistency. The Roosevelt Dime, introduced in 1946 to honor President Franklin D. Roosevelt after his death, had long since become a staple of daily transactions, unassuming, widely circulated, and never expected to stir much excitement. By 1981, the coin's design hadn't changed in decades, and the mint's procedures had become finely tuned to mass production. Billions of dimes were struck that year across multiple facilities, each bearing the same standard features: Roosevelt's profile, the date, the word "Liberty," and the mint mark positioned to the side. On the reverse, the torch flanked by olive and oak branches symbolized liberty, peace, and strength. All of it was routine. All of it was predictable. Except, in a very limited number of cases, it wasn't. Somewhere in that year's production, a small group of dimes emerged not as anomalies visible to the eye at first glance, but as silent outliers that had somehow dodged detection by both machine and human. One such coin didn't spark notice until it passed through the hands of a meticulous collector in rural Pennsylvania almost a decade later. Gregory Voss, a retired military mechanic with an eye for detail and a quiet obsession with coin roll hunting, was methodically checking a batch of dimes he'd picked up from a local bank when something felt off. Not looked, felt. The coin in question bore the date 1981, and the Philadelphia mint mark, but the surface was unusually smooth. The coin's edges lacked the well-defined reading expected from a dime. Under better lighting, Gregory noticed the image details: Roosevelt's hair, the lettering, even the branches on the reverse, seemed slightly muted, as though they'd been softly pressed rather than crisply struck. Intrigued, he weighed it. The scale returned a number that made him pause. It was significantly lighter than the expected 2.27 grams for a standard Roosevelt dime. He placed the coin aside and began researching planchet weights and compositions. He compared its dimensions and edge finish to other dimes, and eventually brought it to a regional coin show for a second opinion. A dealer there, after examining the coin under magnification and listening carefully to its ring sound when tapped, looked up at Gregory with a curious smile. He'd seen something like this before, rare, but real. The dealer sent the coin off for authentication. What returned from the grading service was not just confirmation, but revelation. Gregory's dime had been struck on a planchet intended for a foreign coin, a smaller, lighter, non-standard blank that should never have been fed into the U.S. dime press. The dies were correct, the design was fully American, but the blank underneath came from outside that carefully controlled production process. Somehow, during a window when the mint was handling multiple contracts for international coinage, a wrong planchet had slipped through the sorting machinery and entered the U.S. die press. The error wasn't flashy. It didn't scream its rarity. It whispered it. A slightly thinner coin, a subtle difference in color, a weak strike where the metal failed to fill out the design completely, those were the signs. But to a trained collector, they meant everything. The story of Gregory's find sparked new interest in 1981 dimes. It wasn't a year most collectors had considered unusual before. But now, word spread that coins from that year might harbor a stealth error, one only detectable through weight, texture, and detailed examination. Coin forums lit up. Others began digging through old rolls and collections. A few more examples were uncovered in other parts of the country, each struck on off-metal blanks, some likely aluminum alloys or steel core planchets meant for Central American coinage. The mint's historical contracts with other nations offered clues but no definitive source for the planchets. In one particularly fascinating case, a 1981 dime struck on a thin brass planchet turned up at auction and, after X-ray fluorescence testing, was shown to match the composition used for coins of the Dominican Republic around the same time. That suggested the wrong blank had not only come from a foreign coin batch but may have been stored at the same facility or shared conveyor lines with the U.S. production run. The implications were remarkable: a dime that carried the face of Roosevelt but was born from a fragment of another nation's monetary design. As word spread, certified grading services began formally cataloging these pieces as 1981 Roosevelt dime struck on foreign planchet. They were categorized not just by year, but by the weight and metal composition, each variation a chapter in a story no one at the mint intended to write. Collectors with sharp instincts and accurate scales now eyed their 1981 dimes with suspicion and hope. Unlike double dies or off-center strikes, these planchet errors carried a mystique rooted in their subtlety. There was no dramatic misalignment or missing detail, just the quiet fact that the coin, for all its outward normalcy, had been forged in the wrong medium. It was like discovering a novel printed on the pages of an entirely different book. Only a few dozen examples have been confirmed to date, each with slightly different characteristics based on the metal used. Some are brass, others a silvery aluminum alloy, and a few remain unidentified even after metallurgical testing. The mystery only adds to their allure. How many more exist, buried in jars or drawers, mistaken for common dimes? Today, these 1981-era dimes occupy a strange and special space in the numismatic world. They are not the flashiest coins, nor the most visually dramatic, but they carry an intrigue that seasoned collectors value deeply. A single mistake, a moment of misfed metal, created a coin that exists on the edge of two stories, the official one, and the one that was never meant to be told. And now, these rare 1981 U.S. Roosevelt Dime coins, struck on foreign planchets and confirmed through meticulous scrutiny, have reached a stunning collector value ranging from $40,000 to $106,000. In 1988, the Roosevelt Dime quietly continued its decades-long role in American currency, slipping effortlessly into pockets, registers, and hands across the nation. It bore the same trusted design it had carried since 1946, Franklin D. Roosevelt's familiar profile on the obverse, the torch, olive branch, and oak branch on the reverse. At the Philadelphia and Denver mints, millions of these coins were struck with speed and precision. To most, they were nothing more than 10 cents, uniform, routine, and entirely unremarkable. But among the endless tide of flawless production, a few rogue pieces managed to defy the system. Not through bold damage or extreme misalignments, but through subtleties that whispered of an unseen error beneath their worn surface. Years after these coins first left the mint, a middle school teacher named Valerie Perkins from Richmond, Virginia, stumbled upon something unusual. She had been collecting pocket change for a classroom economics project. Her goal was to teach her students about the history of American coins and the idea of intrinsic versus perceived value. With rolls of dimes gathered from local banks, she began sorting them by year. It was her simple hobby, carried out with more curiosity than expectation. Until she held one particular coin to the light. It was a 1988 Roosevelt Dime. At first glance, nothing screamed unusual. The date was clear, the mint mark unremarkable, and the general appearance seemed perfectly normal. But when she tilted it, she noticed how the light behaved strangely on the coin's surface. It lacked the sharp glint of a copper-nickel-clad coin. It looked duller, muted in tone. Even stranger, the edge felt smoother, the ridges almost worn away, and when she dropped it gently on a desk beside a standard dime, the sound was different, less metallic, almost hollow. Her curiosity piqued, Valerie took the dime to a local jeweler who weighed it for her. It came in lighter than expected, by enough to suggest something wasn't right. Encouraged, she contacted a regional coin dealer, who examined the coin under magnification. He immediately noticed how the design elements, Roosevelt's cheekbone, the lettering on Liberty, even the flames of the torch, were less pronounced. The strike was soft, indicating either a worn die or, more likely, an incompatible metal. Testing would later reveal that this 1988 dime had been struck on a planchet intended for a foreign coin. The U.S. Mint, during this period, was contracted to strike coins for several other nations. Sometimes, planchets for those contracts, similar in size but differing in composition, accidentally slipped into the presses used for U.S. coins. The result was a genuine Roosevelt dime, with all correct U.S. features, but minted on a blank that didn't belong to it. Valerie's coin was not unique in its existence, but it was rare in its survival. Over time, a handful of similar 1988 dimes surfaced, each revealing slight variations in weight, composition, and edge detail. Some were brass-colored, others appeared faintly silvery or darker than the standard issue. All bore signs of being struck on non-standard blanks. Some experts theorized that the foreign planchets were left over from runs made for Caribbean or South American nations. Others speculated that internal testing of new materials, possibly for cost-saving measures, could explain the presence of strange alloys. In one particularly fascinating case, a 1988 dime was analyzed using X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy and was found to contain trace amounts of tin and zinc in ratios not used in U.S. coins. This hinted at an origin tied to a small overseas denomination, one that had been discontinued or reissued, leaving leftover blanks to be mistakenly fed into American production lines. These weren't showy era coins. There were no dramatic misalignments or double strikes. They were quiet anomalies, coins that told their story only to those who cared enough to listen. But that's what made them so captivating. They demanded expertise, attention, and intuition. They represented a different kind of rarity, not loud and obvious, but layered and complex. Collectors with a sharp eye and a digital scale began hunting for them. Most came up empty. But every so often, one surfaced, just slightly off in color, just barely underweight, just different enough to earn a second look. When submitted to grading services, they were verified as genuine mint errors, typically labeled as struck on wrong planchet or off metal strike. Each coin's individual characteristics made it a case study in minting precision gone slightly astray. The numismatic market responded with growing interest. These errors didn't exist in large enough numbers to flood the market, but when authenticated examples came up for sale, they captured attention from seasoned collectors and institutional investors alike. The mystery of origin, combined with the technical nature of the error, gave these coins enduring appeal, and what started as a schoolteacher's educational experiment became a turning point in the understanding of one particular year's coinage. The 1988 Roosevelt Dime, thought to be unremarkable, suddenly became the focus of error collectors across the country. The subtle slip in metal, the lightness of the planchet, the faint strike, together, they transformed a simple dime into an object of great interest and increasing value. Over time, the value of these 1988 dime era coins has climbed steadily as awareness spread and supply remained scarce. Today, verified examples of this rare minting error have reached an extraordinary value, ranging from $32,000 to $96,000. In 2004, the Roosevelt Dime quietly continued its near 60-year legacy, passing through vending machines, pockets, and cash registers with little fanfare. At the United States Mint, operations ran with mechanical efficiency, presses calibrated, dies inspected, and blanks carefully monitored to meet the demands of mass coinage. The Roosevelt design had become such a fixture that its presence on the dime felt almost invisible. Minted in both Philadelphia and Denver, millions of these coins rolled off the presses that year, blending into the everyday economy without ever demanding a second glance. But in this sea of standard production, a few unnoticed anomalies slipped through, hiding secrets beneath their metallic surfaces, secrets only time and a keen eye would reveal. In suburban Montana, a coin collector named Elliot Harding, known in online circles for his low-key but deeply passionate hunts through bank rolls, stumbled upon one such coin. He wasn't after errors at the time, just completing date sets, searching for high-grade examples, and checking for strike clarity. He had purchased $100 worth of dimes from a local credit union, and over the course of several evenings, meticulously examined each one. Most coins were dismissed within seconds. But one dime, dated 2004, made him pause, not because of a visible defect, but because of a strange dullness in its appearance. The coin lacked the usual gleam of a clad Roosevelt dime. Its surface looked softly muted, almost dusty in tone, as though it had been exposed to an unusual environment. But its wear was minimal. More puzzling still, its reeded edge felt too smooth, and when dropped onto his wooden desk, it emitted a low, flat ring instead of the expected sharp chime. Something about it felt wrong. Elliot's instincts took over. He weighed the coin, 2.05 grams. Lighter than the standard 2.27 grams. He took caliper measurements, the diameter matched, but the thickness was slightly off. He knew that weight variances could occur with significant circulation wear, but this coin didn't show enough handling to justify that. Its features, Roosevelt's hairline, the lettering, the branches on the reverse, were noticeably soft, as if the metal hadn't quite filled the dies completely. Elliot posted detailed images online to a community of error coin enthusiasts. Within hours, a dozen replies confirmed what he suspected. he might be holding a 2004 Roosevelt Dime struck on a foreign or off-metal planchet. One user mentioned that the U.S. Mint had, around that time, fulfilled international coinage contracts, raising the possibility that a blank intended for another country's coin had been mistakenly used for a U.S. dime. Eager to confirm its authenticity, Elliot submitted the coin to a professional grading service. The results were striking. The coin had indeed been struck on a non-standard planchet, likely an aluminum alloy blank or a copper-zinc mixture meant for coinage outside of the U.S. The die strikes were correct, the imagery and date aligned perfectly with the U.S. Mint's design for 2004 dimes. Yet the metal underneath told a different story, an internal misstep where a rogue blank slipped into the wrong press line and produced a coin that shouldn't exist. The revelation sent Elliot deeper into research. He uncovered other reports of similar 2004 dime errors. Some weighed as little as 1.9 grams, others bore slight color differences or lacked a visible mint mark. One particularly unusual piece was struck on a planchet so thin that parts of the design were barely present, revealing the limits of the die pressure against an incompatible metal. These weren't coins with bold double strikes or off-center misalignments. They were quiet misfits, technically perfect in form, yet physically foreign at their core. What made these errors so intriguing was their subtlety. Unlike traditional minting blunders, these off-metal strikes required close scrutiny to even notice. Their existence wasn't obvious, it was uncovered. And that's what gave them their power. They existed in hiding, masquerading as ordinary dimes, waiting for someone to notice their weight, tone, or touch. Grading services began to formalize their classification. 2004 Roosevelt Dime struck on wrong planchet, often with additional notes about the suspected metal composition. Each verified piece became a microlegend, adding weight to the theory that the Mint's production lines in that year had briefly intersected with foreign planchets, an error likely caused by machinery overlap, storage mishaps, or late-night shifts when human oversight faltered. Collectors, especially those specializing in modern errors, began combing through their 2004 sets. Suddenly, what was once just another year became a hotbed of mystery and speculation. The hunt wasn't for a coin that looked broken, it was for one that felt ever so slightly different. Just a few grams off. Just a little duller. Just enough to make a collector's pulse quicken. Elliot's coin was eventually sold at auction, not because he wanted to part with it, but because the growing value offered him the chance to invest deeper into his collecting passion. The sale drew widespread interest, with multiple bidders recognizing the coin's scarcity and authenticity. A second example surfaced shortly after, verified to be struck on a brass-plated steel planchet, the kind used in overseas coins from Eastern Europe during the early 2000s. The connection only deepened the mystery. How had these foreign planchets been housed so close to U.S. production? Was it an isolated case, or part of a wider unnoticed issue? The answers remain unclear, but the market's interest is not. These 2004 off-metal Roosevelt dimes, verified and graded, now command significant attention whenever they appear. Their story is not one of flash or spectacle, but of quiet mystery, subtle craftsmanship, and a rare misstep in a system designed to prevent exactly this kind of anomaly. Today, this rare error coin from the 2004 Roosevelt Dime series, struck on an unintended planchet, authenticated through weight, sound, and composition, carries a collector value ranging from $28,000 to $84,000.